Welcome back, everyone. This is the fifth and final episode of Impact and Innovation for Spring 2025. I'm here with Tagan Engel, my good friend who is a New Haven-based activist working on food systems and nutritional justice, and also teaches at Yale. Thank you so much for being here, Tagan.
Thank you for having me.
So what I've been sharing with people is that my public health entrepreneurship course this spring was divided into 3 modules. The 2 modules we've already discussed on the podcast this season were about capitalism and health equity, and then about extrapreneurship or innovating beyond the boundaries of multiple institutions. The one module we haven't talked about yet, which I'm so delighted you're here to speak to today, is about drivers of health, which we actually start the course off with, but we're kind of ending with it on the podcast, which I think is very appropriate. So many people, when they think about public health entrepreneurship, they assume we're talking about healthcare, like clinics and everything, but we're talking about what people need to be healthy and the role of innovators in helping people get the things they need to be healthy. So what I'd like to focus on today with you is food as a driver of health and all the different ways that people are out there helping people get access to healthy food, which is one of the core things they need to be healthy. So can you please help us get started by sharing how you got into this and also a little bit more about what you're doing today? And then I'll go back and ask you questions.
Sure. So I'm born and raised in New Haven. I'm first generation born here. My grandparents are Holocaust survivors. And so first of all, their legacy of surviving, escaping a death camp and telling their story, which I grew up around, has very much informed my justice work in the world and really seeing like the story of my people and all other peoples who have survived genocides and oppression as having like being in solidarity with people. And so that is what has inspired my justice work. The food work started because I love eating. I love food.
And you love preparing food. And you brought me 2 amazing energy balls today, which I ate before filming. So I'm feeling very energetic.
Yeah. So as a young person, I was like getting into doing teaching, education, justice work. But I really followed my heart into the kitchen. And I ended up working as a chef for 10 years, mostly in New York City and sometime in Boston. And I was doing justice work in the kitchen, like doing workers' rights organizing, doing sourcing from local farms, learning a ton about nutrition education and kind of healthy eating, whole food eating. But I really wanted justice work to become the center of my work. And so I sort of flipped it where I stopped working as a chef and I started doing community-based food work, food organizing, justice, running programs, and that looked like many different things. So community-driven policy work, supporting low-income and Black and brown food entrepreneurs, cooking education, supporting urban agriculture, school and community gardens, and many other things, farm-to-school programs, lots of things. So that's what I've been doing for the past 30 years. And health, of course, is a really huge part of that work, which we can talk more about. But just to cap off, in the past few years, I was invited to do some work at Yale University, starting at the Center for Business and the Environment, and then now teach a course at the School of the Environment, mostly because students from Yale were coming and finding me in the community. So people who were wanting to do anything food and community related, justice related, local sourcing, healthy food, they would just come and find me. And so Stu Duke, who's the director of the Center for Business and the Environment, said, well, you're basically doing work for Yale but not getting paid.
Yeah.
Can we pay you? Which is an amazing thing and not always how Yale operates with New Haven communities.
And
so
I remember my
grateful.
students in the social entrepreneurship lab, when I asked them to pick a topic and develop a venture, a lot of them would pick nutritional justice and food waste.
Yeah.
And tried sometimes separately, sometimes tried to bring them together, and a lot of them found you.
Yeah.
So Stu is right.
Yeah. So, so I'm grateful to be able to provide supports to students. That mostly happens right now through advising on projects. I teach a discussion group on shifting power and resources in the food system. So really learning in practice, how do we do that work? How do we shift power, shift resources to address inequities in our food system? And then I teach a clinic class that is called the Regenerative Agriculture and Just Food Systems Lab. And that's where I get students working directly for farmers, organizations, or businesses that are doing that work. So they get professional experience and school experience.
Okay, I think the next thing we need to talk about is the food systems notion. But
Sure.
first, before I forget, you also have your own podcast,
Oh,
right?
yes. Yeah.
Okay, tell us a little bit more
Yeah.
about that.
In 2016, I started a podcast because I really felt like I was seeing so many inspirational things in the community about food, about agriculture, about creative social justice and kind of community building. And I just wanted more people to see it. So it's called The Table Underground: Stories of Food, Radical Love, and Creative Social Justice. And there's about 80 shows there. I also recorded a lot of shows with Connecticut Public Radio over the last few years, so people can see those on the website. And
Okay,
there's new
cool.
podcasts still coming out.
That's awesome. Okay, so we try to apply systems thinking a lot in this course and in this podcast. And that means that whatever you're working on, you think about what is the system around it
Hmm.
and who are the different stakeholders and how do they interact and how can any intervention that we design think about helping stakeholders work better together. So talk to me about how you see and understand the food system and how that informs your work in terms of like you being like a systems change maker.
Sure. Well, the food system is basically all the parts of how food exists in our lives. So, from growing to processing to getting it out into the community, as well as food waste, as well as all the people involved in that process, and then all the factors involved in that process. So, we have culture and how it relates to food, social factors like policy, um, and regulations. We have businesses. So like all the different factors that relate to food are part of the food system. Sometimes people only think about sort of the food growing, processing, eating, and waste part, but it's
Hmm.
really important that we look at all those other circles of what
The
influence
underlying
food.
or upstream.
Yeah, because if we want to address food, so with like social determinants of health, right, we often start thinking about nutrition. Like, what are we eating? How are you preparing it? How much are you eating? But if you don't actually look at the systems of what food do people have access to, that involves transportation, right? Transportation is very influenced by how much money you have, where you live. Is there good public transportation or not? Where do grocery stores choose to locate? Then there's also economic factors. How much money do you make, right? Do you have enough money to buy the food that you would want to buy if you can even get to the grocery store? Um, and and then there's how much time do you have? In our current, poverty is and wealth are the number one drivers of health. So underneath our food system, that is the number one thing that influences our physical health and our mental health, in the hugest ways. So if we really want to look at food and look at social determinants of health, we can't only look at what are people eating and cooking. We have to really look at all these other factors.
Which determine why they're eating and cooking the
Exactly.
things they are.
Yeah.
My very first podcast episode in Impact and Innovation was about food. It was with
Mm,
Doug Roud, the founder of Daily Table. And he talked about poverty of time, not just
yes.
poverty of money. And
Yes.
he referenced a Harvard article that proved, quote unquote, that, for $3.50, you can feed a family a really healthy meal. But that study assumed you have the time and the knowledge that you know to go buy these legumes and soak them overnight and like get, and
Right. And if you're working three jobs and maybe you're a single parent and
exactly.
you're living in a place that's extremely stressful for whatever different reasons, it's really hard to have the time and make those choices I mean, all of us when we're stressed fall into that. But if your life is constantly stressed like that and you constantly don't have enough time, then yeah, that
Exactly.
becomes really
He
difficult.
thinks of his typical customer as being a single working mother of color who has more than one job, who's getting home just in time for dinner,
Right.
needs to open the door and put food on the table. And she's just going to stop at KFC or whatever
Right.
on the way home from the bus stop. And that's who he designed Daily Table
Yeah.
around. And he also mentioned some of the underlying policies about why, if you live in an urban center, it's so hard to get fresh produce, and how you mentioned transportation and also the policies that made like high fructose corn syrup
Right.
so prevalent. And I'm not well versed in all those policies, but did they just speak to your point of going way back to the root causes?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm glad you just mentioned some of these things around sort of the quality of the food we have, because even the fresh food that we have is much less nutritious than it used to be because we have a lot of industrialized farming, and so there's are you eating less processed food, but there's also the quality of our less processed food, and so our soil is not as good as it used to be because of conventional farming and lots of like tilling of soil, putting lots of chemicals in. So literally our vegetables have less minerals and nutrients in them than they used to 100 years ago. And so, that is a factor as well. And so I work on also a lot with farmers on how to actually support farmers in using farming practices that start to put those nutrients back into our food and be using farming practices that are not harming the earth and harming the workers on the farms. So that is another important piece. But yeah, all of those are really vital parts of how do we change our food system so that it nourishes people.
I want to ask you more about one particular farm that you work with, but first I want to get your thoughts on something that some of the cases I taught this semester talked about, which
Hmm.
was food as medicine, where there are some nonprofits and social enterprises that are trying to help people, low-income people, largely people in urban centers, um, get help accessing fresh produce.
Hmm.
And so, for example, they're using a mechanism called an 1115 waiver, which is a Medicaid mechanism where if your doctor tells you what you really need to do is eat more fresh fruits and vegetables, okay, good luck, see you in 6 months. Like, you're not going to be able to do that. The, Historically, the healthcare provider could prescribe a really expensive medicine that Medicaid might reimburse, but why shouldn't they also reimburse fresh fruits and vegetables? So the 1115 waiver in some states helps them do that.
Hmm.
And my students' response was varied, right? Some students were like, oh, great, we're helping people get the things they need to be healthy. Others were like, wait, why should the healthcare system be paying for food? And so, what are your thoughts on that as someone who works in the food system?
Yes. So I'll give a simple answer and then a complicated answer.
Okay.
So the simple answer is I think that is absolutely fine. I think any way that we help people get healthy food is good. So I think that is a good idea. But the more complex answer is that we live in a society that is founded on stolen land and stolen people and exploited people, and we continue to have a society that prioritizes profits over the well-being of people and the earth. And what we really need to do is be prioritizing people and the earth in what we do. So if people had jobs that they made enough money at their jobs, and we had grocery stores in reasonable distance from where everybody lives, and they had a lot of healthy food in those grocery stores that was affordable, then we wouldn't need our medical system to be
Right.
subsidizing food. So the system solution is to actually rebalance or not rebalance, it wasn't ever balanced, to create balance in our society so that people have what they need in terms of food, the ability to get
In
food and
terms
have
of tackling
life-giving
the
food.
root cause.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I think that that is one tactic that can work to help people get food who are going to their doctors, because most of the diseases, the largest number, I don't remember the exact data, but the diseases that are killing people the most are preventable, and they're all diet-related
Yeah,
diseases.
they're all related. Like you
So
might
it makes,
have high blood pressure and obesity
yeah,
and
hypertension and
diabetes
yeah,
and heart problems,
yep,
and these can all be solved with
exactly.
at least partly with
So
fresh
yeah,
food.
we should turn to our healthcare system as one of the tools to help solve that
And it
problem.
can also save money for the healthcare system,
Right,
like
exactly.
in the
It's
long run.
preventative
Yeah.
instead of having expensive medicines to treat things afterwards.
Okay, so thanks
Absolutely.
for that perspective. And now back to asking you about the farming aspect of it.
Yeah.
So I know that you're on the board of a social enterprise called Soulfire Farm, which is this, the way I interpret it from talking to people who work in food system, it's like this golden standard, like everyone really looks up to, and they're like, oh, Tagan, she's on the board of Soulfire Farm. So tell us more about what that is, how that started, and what they're doing around nutritional justice.
Sure. So Soulfire Farm is a Black Afro-Indigenous led, it started as a family farm, but it also is a farm training organization. It is a nonprofit. And does many different kinds of work. So Soulfire Farm's mission is to seed sovereignty and uproot racism in the food system. And they do that in many different ways. So one part is growing food for the community. And I'll say that I'm there as a board member. I've been a founding board member, so I've been on the board for 10 years. The farm existed before that, but the nonprofit work has grown, the organizational work has grown a lot over these years. I'm the only white person on the board currently, and it is a Black and Brown led organization, but there are a couple white folks who are in the organization, and we really try to be there in solidarity with folks and supporting, and I'm really honored to support their work. So there is a farm. We grow food that gets distributed in solidarity
Where is it?
shares. Oh, it's in Troy, New York. It's outside, Soulfire Farm is in Grafton, New York, which is about 20 minutes east of Troy, New York, so upstate New York.
Got it.
So there's a family farm where food is grown and given out in solidarity shares to people who are trying to recover from food apartheid. So what other people call food deserts, we call food apartheid because a desert is a natural ecosystem, but apartheid is a human-created system of oppression, and that's really what people who are struggling with not having enough food and access to food are experiencing as food apartheid. So we have fresh food and also some teas and jams and other things we make that we get out to people in the community through solidarity shares. And then we also have a really amazing farmer training program. And so in addition to eating food and learning to prepare food, people are learning to grow food. And also it's focused on Afro-Indigenous crops and growing practices. So it's really helping Black and Brown folks, BIPOC folks, be many people's memory of farming, especially for Black Americans, is enslavement. And so there's a lot of kind of spiritual and communal healing work about helping people to feel like they can be involved in farming as part of their ancestral practices that are not connected to enslavement. Because, in fact, a lot of the wisdom that we have in terms of how to farm really well come from Black African cultures that came over into this land or from Indigenous peoples on this land. And so there's, in addition to the literal food part, there's also this healing, there's this spiritual and mental healing around understanding ancestral practices and coming into community of folks. Because farming in this country is such a white profession. And over the years, a lot of land has been stolen from Black and Brown communities. And so there's many layers of healing that is happening and change that's happening there. So that's the farmer training program part of it, which are immersion programs. And then there is the system change part of the work. And so Soulfire Farm works in coalition with many other groups that are working on policy, that are working together to address needs across different geographic areas, and just partner with like-minded organizations for systemic change.
That's a lot. And
Yes.
It sounds like it is a combination of direct service and systems change and framework change,
Yeah.
like all the different levels of impact.
Yeah.
And I love how they are thinking about remembering the ancestral wisdom that may sometimes be lost. I've been thinking a lot about that in teaching about social innovation and entrepreneurship, because the more and more I teach it, and right now it's been like 15 years, I think, the more I realize that sometimes we get caught up in the buzzwords, and that may not be serving our purpose. If the purpose is to create long-term social change, then why are we using capitalistic terms and concepts like entrepreneurship?
Or even innovation, which says that something always has to be new.
Yeah.
In some ways, we need to remember some of the ancient things where we were more living in deeper relationship with each other and deeper relationship with the land and in community, right? Like having more cooperative ways that we work in community, which are things that people of every culture way back. Some people have to go farther back, but those principles are things that are ancient for humans, and we need to remember those things.
Exactly. And I think they can be applied to in a very tangible way to farming, as you described, but also in a broader way to thinking about working collectively for long-term social change in a less individualistic way. Like, I'm going to be a heropreneur and come up with this new idea and then implement and scale it. And maybe that's not what we need, right? Another thing that really resonates with me about the frameworks that Soulfire Farm uses is this notion that there are so many different ways to contribute to social change. I have this diagram that they have on Instagram, 4 wings of movement collaboration, where it's basically a butterfly with 4 wings, and the different wings are resisting, reforming, building, and healing,
Mm-hmm.
where building might be the one most closely aligned with social innovation and social entrepreneurship, but really we need all 4. And I'm just going to read a little bit more from it. So
Sure.
under resist, it says protest, boycott, march, disobey, like old school advocacy. And it says resisting oppression via direct action. Think occupy, protest, boycotts, marches, tree sitting, etc., where you're asking someone else to take an action that will change the world, like you're advocating for policy
Mm-hmm.
change, right? And then reforming, it says civic engagement, leadership, policy, systems change. So reforming existing systems to shift power and resources. Think holding elected office, advocacy, institutional leadership, etc. So it's really about systems change, like
That's sort
what,
of the working inside and making change from inside, and the resistance
yeah.
is sort of inspiring
That's
change
a good
from
way to
outside.
summarize it.
Yeah.
And I don't think any of these are mutually exclusive.
No, I mean, that's the whole point of
Exactly.
them
You
is
need to
that
do
you
all of
you need
them.
all 4 wings of a butterfly to fly, right? And we need people who are resisting, people who are building, people who are healing, people who are reforming in order to move our society forward, in order to have like really effective innovation, right? And healthy society. And so something I love about this diagram, and it's especially helpful. I mean, I think working with students, but anyone who's feeling like they want to do something in the world, it can be so overwhelming because you feel like, oh, I have to do everything, right? But what I love about this is you can say, so pick which realm you're working in, like which wing are you working on, and allow yourself to focus on that. And then how can you partner with people who are doing those other things? So that's where like coalitions are beautiful, right? Because maybe you're working within an office like the Department of Public Health, right? And you're like, okay, I'm going to improve this nutrition education program so that the food we're teaching people about is more culturally relevant for people. It's not only saying that one culture's food is healthy, but others aren't. And I'm going to try to build relationships with people in the community so that these programs, people have trust with us and they're effective. But I don't really. My job doesn't let me work on policy, right? But I'm gonna like find someone who works on policy, and maybe I'll let them know that our office could like contribute or could sign on or join a meeting once a month or something to partner with them, or partnering with like people who are healers in the community or people who are doing protest work to sort of push the narrative from outside that then helps change things inside the system, right? And so it sort of helps to think like, oh, I don't have to work on all 4 of these things. I'm going to focus on my lane, my wing, but then how can I partner with other people so that we can all work well together?
Yeah, and that you can get involved in all 4
Right.
in one way or the other, right? Like you can, like Cheryl Dorsey, who's a medical doctor who leads Echoing Green, an
Yeah.
organization that supports social entrepreneurs, calls it from program to platform. You
Hmm.
can be running a social enterprise or program and then use that work as a platform to advocate for policy change. So you can do more than one of these. Should I
Yeah.
keep reading?
Sure.
So then the third one is building. So create new systems to replace the old, building new words and systems. Think co-ops, community ownership
Hmm.
models, land trusts, social networks, food hubs, organic farms, etc. And then the last one is healing. So tending, caring, making art, music therapy. So healing individual and collective trauma. Think art and experience making, storytelling, medicine making, therapy, music, etc. And so obviously this isn't an all-inclusive blueprint of all the things you can do to change the world, but it drives home the message that there are so many ways you can contribute, and that
Yeah.
maybe, just like your story tells us, you might play different roles at different parts in your career and in
Hmm.
your life, right?
Absolutely.
One
Absolutely.
thing
Yeah.
I tell my students the first day of class is, you're not going to solve the world's problems. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove that pressure off your shoulders. No one person or one organization can do that. It
Mm-mm.
takes many generations of people working
Right.
collectively to do that. And probably whatever you try to do in your lifetime will fail, just because statistically speaking, that is the most common outcome.
Hmm.
So why are we in this class? Why are we having these conversations? Because there are amazing people out there doing incredible work. And you get to decide to what degree and how you're going to be part of that work. That's it. And the answer is going to be different for each one of you. And so that's what you get to explore in this class. I have a feeling that your teaching is very similar at the way you talk about it in the classroom.
Yeah. Yeah, but actually some of the things that you're talking about makes me want to share some more things about Soulfire Farm, if that's
Yes,
okay.
let's hear more.
So, because I think
this
about
diagram came from them,
yes,
right?
this diagram is from them, and it actually is used as part of, I think it's in their uprooting racism training and other trainings that they do. So when you think about like social entrepreneurship, these are like values-based businesses, right? And so
Or nonprofits.
Or nonprofits, right? So organizations, businesses. So something that I deeply respect and love about Soulfire Farm is the way that we try to put values into practice, and that's a constant learning and evolution. And so some of the things you just read off, like having a cooperative, for example. So originally the land was owned by Leah Penniman and Jonah Vitale Wolf, their husband and wife, and they bought the land and built a home and started the farm. That land has since been moved into a cooperative ownership with other people on the land. So it's sort of like putting that, getting away from private land ownership and moving into cooperative ownership is one way that they've done that. You mentioned things like heropreneurs, right? And so Soulfire Farm does a really good job of telling their story, and Leah's an amazing storyteller, and so they have gotten a lot of attention, and that's sort of something in our culture that we kind of glom on to, like the one person with the solution or the famous person. And so they've done a lot of work they have a whole toolkit on kind of, I forget exactly what it's called, but basically it's a media toolkit and for foundations on how to move away from hero worship and how to share resources
I love
out.
that.
So there's
Is
a
that
lot
on
of
their website if people want to learn more?
I think it is on their website, and they've done it in different ways. They've sometimes been part of groups of people offering workshops for philanthropists in terms of how to understand how to take burden off of organizations and individuals, how to fund more equitably. But they've also done a lot of diverting funds. So if people are giving them money, but we have enough to do what we need to do, we re-gift money or ask people to give to someone else, or diverting media attention to other people. And then just some of the things of like just so much deep learning about seeds, about growing food, and thinking about like now when people come to the farm for programs, almost every single thing that they eat, with very few exceptions, is coming from the farm. And that's just like, such an amazing experience for people who, most of us don't get, unless we're farmers living on a farm, don't get to experience that. And even for some farmers living on farms who maybe don't grow a diversity of things, don't get to experience that. So those are a few of the things. And
I
also
really
having,
go. I'm going to sign up for one of their programs.
Yeah, well, they have community work days. They're listed on the website, and people can sign up for them through the growing season. And then another thing I'll mention is in terms of like organizational structure and leadership. So it's very horizontal. There are directors, there's co-directors, but there's a lot of feedback, like there's peer evaluations, and everyone evaluates each other. So staff evaluate each other, staff evaluate directors, directors evaluate staff. There's lots of like communication and conflict resolution processes that we've put into place. And then we have a participatory planning and budgeting process for how we decide on our strategic goals and our budget every year. And so those are some of the examples, but in terms of sort of, there's the food part of healing, but there's all these other healings we need to do of like, how do we work and live together in a way that supports everyone and isn't just like, oh, well, you're just a worker, you just show up and do what you're told. That's not really nourishing for most people either. So those are just some examples.
I love that you circled back to the healing, because there is a lot of dialogue in the social innovation and social change making space about, and the last episode was also about mental health and healing intergenerational traumas and all these things. And many people see this work of being part of social change as a collective healing and liberation. And it's part, and many people talk about the importance of doing internal work in order to be able to engage with these systems and with these movements. And also that doing the work itself is part of that healing, individually and collectively. And we don't yet have a really robust way of talking about this, but I think that the way you're talking about it and the way Soulfire Farm is talking about it is really helpful in helping to understand how these concepts and terminologies fit into the work of social change. We're trying to go back to century-old human decisions that led to where we are today. And it's not enough to come up with an innovation that's going to change everything. You really have to go back
Right.
to these root causes.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
is your advice for people who want to get involved in this space, who don't know where to start, who want to learn more? I mean, you've played so many different roles over the decades. What do you tell your students or people in community who are just getting started? Or who
Yeah.
might have another job? It might be someone more
Right.
advanced in their career, but just want to learn more and get involved in the space.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that's nice about food is that there's so many ways, food or agriculture, there's so many ways to get involved. So I think if this is something that people want to just make a little time for cooking at home, that could be just
Yeah,
like
seriously.
like, okay, we're going to cook as a family, or just like work on, if that's the thing that calls you, if your heart is like, I want to cook or I want to eat something
Yeah,
different, then like follow your heart, right? Really,
yeah.
like the things that we're excited about are the things that it'll be easier to dedicate time to. So if it's something like that that's personal, I would say just,
Engaging
dedicate,
with food in a
make a
different
simple goal,
way.
like once a week I'm going to cook something from scratch, and find, you can just look at online and find some things that you like, or find a good cookbook somewhere, or a friend who likes to cook and cook with them. And same with gardening. So if that's something like personal you want to do, if you're blessed with like somewhere to have pots or a backyard. And then if you want to do something that's more communal, people can get involved with community gardens, and school gardens, and even volunteer on local farms if that's the thing that calls to you. Um, and if people are in New Haven, there's also, and in Connecticut, there's a wonderful group that has started called Liberated Land Cooperative, which is a network of Black farmers who all have different farms, and they're pooling their produce together to have a CSA, which is a community supported agriculture, where people
Specific to
basically,
Connecticut.
yeah, and they have drop points in different areas. So you can be supporting Black farmers and getting fresh produce, get a subscription from them. And they also do policy work, so supporting them, and you can look them up. There a lot of different farmers connected with them if people are interested in sort of what's happening in this state. People can certainly do a volunteer day at Soulfire Farm, or
Okay, I'll
support their
definitely do that.
work.
Yeah.
At Soulfire also has a map that's a reparations map on their site, where you can find like all different Black, Brown, and Indigenous farming projects and food projects that are all over the country and all over the world. And so you could read up on them and donate to them if you want, or if they're in your area, support them, just volunteer. Yeah, I don't know. I could go on and on, but there's, I just think there really is sort of an unending way to get involved in food. So kind of finding the things that excite you, and maybe what's in your area. So ideally you can do something in person. That's really the best thing to do.
Okay. Before we close, is there anything else that you think our listeners, that you would want them to know that maybe I didn't think to ask you, like any closing words of wisdom?
Oh my goodness. That is a big question. I don't know. My work surrounds food and then social change. And so let me think for a second. I don't know. Is there something you think we didn't touch on?
I think what comes to mind when we're reflecting and closing our conversation is just about the different levels of impact that we touched
Mm,
on at a couple of different points
mm-hmm.
today, about how you can get in touch, you can get involved with something really tangible in terms of
Mm-hmm.
direct service and direct change, whether it's a specific organization or a specific policy or your own engagement with food. And then you can think about the more removed levels that ultimately will create more lasting social change, but will just take
Yeah.
longer, like being part of a movement. And I think that Soulfire Farms is a great example of it's a specific organization with a specific mission and deliverables, but it's trying to be so much more than that, and it's trying to be part of a movement.
Right.
And I think it's really helpful for us to evolve to think more about social movements.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good note to end on, is
Yeah.
to think about like, what are the movements that you want to be part of in addition to the everyday work that you do.
Yeah.
It's got to be about something bigger than that.
Yeah. That's great. And I think the way that I think about that, like part of what I teach at Yale is about the practices that help us do that. And so I think, first of all, the practice of remembering sort of the history, right? Like, what is the history of this land? Of like, there are indigenous people still here. This land was stolen from indigenous people. They were farming here before we had kind of European style farms. Like just that remembering that that's the context of which we are living. And how does that inspire then how you're involved with indigenous communities or thinking about that? Then things like the importance of relationship, right? Like building meaningful relationships with people in terms of not just like, we use the word extractive, not just like taking things or just buying things, but also how do we build relationships to grow our communities and kind of grow our networks and do that in really meaningful ways and build trust? And how do we think about sort of whatever power that each of us has, that some of us have, we all have different kinds of power, right? And some of us are lacking certain kinds of power, but have others, but we all have different kinds of power. How can we use that power both to take care of ourselves and to try to do good in the spaces around us, to help other people? And that's like the movement part, is how do we use the power we have to collectively help improve our world and do that in a way that feels really meaningful to us. So I think those are some of the big things that I like to talk about. And I think just having that lens of like understanding what is the system, what are the contexts, what are the like the push and pull of what's working and not working in our society as we're making those decisions is really helpful.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for circling back to that. We've learned so much today. I know a lot of our listeners will go to the Table Underground to learn even more, to the Soulfire Farm website. What's the website where you post recipes? Is it also
That's also on the Table Underground? Yeah.
I'm going to be going there to recreate the energy balls you gifted me before this. And thank you for all the work that you do at so many different levels, both teaching here, serving on the board of Soulfire, doing the community advocacy and work, and approaching it all from the social justice lens. We're so grateful to you for all that you do, Tagan.
Thank you so much, Teresa. I'm so grateful for you.
Thank you.